everybody. So, yeah, as I said, lots of nautical nonsense today. So, I'm Graham. I may have spoken here before, a few times. This is actually my 8th time speaking here, which is pretty cool. So I'm currently at Nautical in the Research and Innovation Department. It's not Research and Development because we like to call it something else. I do boat stuff, as you might imagine. And I like the WH, so I couldn't make myself break it at the bottom. But I talk far too much on Twitter, and I don't need hand sanitizer for coronavirus because I'm normally wearing a gas mask. So rather than giving you like a really dry talk about the dull technical details of boats, I mean there will still be some dry technical stuff about boats. I thought I'd go for something with a bit more of a fun stories angle. But first, a disclaimer: I am not a boat. I'm also not a boat person. I've never actually worked on a boat professionally, just unprofessionally. And if you want to talk about actual boats, go ask Cyber Gibbons about bananas. There are opinions. So, why boats? I got hired by Nautical to do full-time research on marine stuff. And Nautical were acquired by Lloyd's Register, who have a huge investment in marine technologies. They do a lot of stuff to do with very big boats. When I say boats, what I mean is like oil carriers, LPG carriers, cruise ships, basically really big boats, usually. Boats have entire networks on them now, and we are trying to work out how to secure those networks. But why boats really? Well, the first thing is that it's big money we're talking about when it comes to big ships. So $500 billion was spent on global marine shipping last year. And in the EU, in terms of cargo, it actually accounts for 90% of trade shipping. That's about 3 trillion euros annually. And cargo vessels, they often have like $500 million plus of basically just stuff on them in goods. A single container, a high-value container, can easily be $10 million or more worth of equipment in. So if you steal one, that's quite a lot of money. And also, like 60% or more of world fuel is transported by boats. Again, lots and lots of money. That can be crude oil, LPG, natural gas, heavy fuel oil, but thankfully that's on its way out because it's horrible, manky sludge and pollutes the hell out of the world. So, yay, let's get rid of that. And even the smallest tankers, even the smallest fuel tankers, we're talking millions of dollars worth of fuel in a single tanker. So if you steal a tanker and drain all the fuel off it into one of your nice shiny pirate boats that you've stolen, yeah, you make an absolute fortune off of it. And also, it's not just about the theft target, it's about the disruption. Moving stuff around the world, things like food, medicines, that if you can't get access to that stuff via marine transport, that can actually really cripple a country. Same goes for things like steel, raw materials for just running your industries. So that can have a sort of national impact, even just loss for that equipment, of those materials. And one of the other things is that this is a weird space where the bad actors actually hurt people. And that doesn't need to be physically, but like if your boat gets run over by, pirates or some government organization, a military, you've got people working on there who take a real mental toll. It's a very stressful situation to be in, particularly if it goes on for a long time. And it does happen. There's I was on a boat, and there's a thing called Navtex, which is a little bit like a fax machine, but it runs over radio. It's used for things like weather reports. But it's also used for security reports. And one of the things I was reading about on one of these security reports was on the coast of Nigeria, there was a group who were sending phishing emails to the captains of boats. They have these like official email accounts that the captain will use for a particular boat, and they were sending phishing emails pretending to be the Coast Guard of Nigeria, and saying that there was, there was some big, collision, some dangerous thing going on up ahead. Please redirect your boat to this location, and that location was a location that wasn't properly protected by the Coast Guard. At which point, folks would jump on and board the place and try and steal anything that wasn't nailed down, basically, and. I did say there was going to be a one little bit of serious stuff in here, and that's this is the crew of the Stena Impero. Don't worry, they are fine. But this is a staged video that was put out by the Iranian military. You see this guy? He's looking at the camera, and this is supposed to be, oh no, they're all fine. They're going about their daily work. Except nobody ever sits around like this with their hands on the table like this in a normal situation. This is not a normal meeting that happens on a boat. And this guy looks at the camera, and the guy behind the camera says, "Don't look at the camera." So it's really obviously staged. The reason that the Iranian military boarded this boat is it was in retaliation for is likely in retaliation for the US and the UK interfering with another Iranian oil vessel called the Adrian Daraya, I think it's called. Can't pronounce it properly. Which was trying to offload oil into Syria. Mike Pompeo called it terrorist oil. It's the most American thing I've ever heard. Apart from the thing when they called it freedom molecules, which was hilarious. But yeah, so they kept these guys on this boat for it was nearly a month, I think, and the whole thing was just basically political saber rattling over access to fuel. This is a previous incident. You may have heard about this one on the news. Two boats in the Gulf of Oman, I believe it was, got attacked with limpet mines. The US and Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other countries are pointing the finger at Iran again. They said that they basically stuck some limpet mines on the side of the ships and tried to blow them up. One person was injured, wounded. Thankfully, everybody was fine. But again, this is another one of these things where it's like, there's a lot of bullshit political saber rattling, and these are just regular people trying to go about their lives in a kind of like, it's a really stressful and hard job. You're working long hours away from family. Sometimes you can be months away from family. So like Skype is the only contact you get, if you can even get that. So yeah, I think putting these regular folks in the middle is kind of bullshit. And I think that if attaching limpet mines to the sides of ships is in scope, cyber stuff is probably in scope too. There's sort of it's sort of nyah, and blowing up ships is kind of nyah. So yeah, and I think that within our remit, we should do as much as possible to try and prevent people ending up in crappy situations, either like this or like with the situation with the phishing attacks, which is always really funny to say when you're talking about boats. Right, let's do some less depressing things. Marine technologies. So what's different about marine tech versus regular tech? Well, the answer is, in some way, not a lot. So I like to use this kind of way of splitting things. Internal versus external communications and IT versus OT. I'll explain what that means properly in a minute, but basically the idea is that IT is your usual stuff like printers and Active Directory and routers and things like that, and OT is stuff like the things that you need to operate a boat. So it's much more kind of ICS, SCADA kind of gear, but there's not always, doesn't have to be network connected. So for example, you've got VHF, UHF, communications, that's considered OT, even if it isn't actually connected via a typical network. So yeah, we can generally split things around like this, and we've got engine control sensors, ECDIS. ECDIS is like navigation, VDR is the voyage data recorder, that's like a black box. I'll explain a bit more about those later. And I already mentioned Navtex, which is like the weird fax thing. So a typical network, the idea is that you sort of split them. So usually you'll have an IT network. You don't generally want to bridge these together. It's usually a bad idea. The OT network usually does things like engine control and navigation, and connecting those things to the things that do your email is possibly not the best idea in the world. But generally speaking, they're aware of this. They're not idiots. They try not to do it. In practice, we'll talk about that later. There is a recent push towards remote management and remote monitoring. So whether that be engine telemetry, whether that just be general fleet management stuff like reporting, the same sort of thing that you would get through AIS. So, for example, where is the boat? How fast is it going? Where's it pointing? How low in the sea is it? What's it carrying? That kind of stuff. But also, is this service running properly? What's all this engine telemetry? And the problem then becomes that you've got a bunch of stuff that's on the OT network that reports all of this stuff, and you need to get it to the internet. And that means that you've got to have a path from the thing that controls where your boat goes to the internet. And it can be done, and it can be done mostly safely. Whether that is mostly safe in practice is a different question. So in terms of IT networks, what are we looking at? It's kind of like what you would expect to see in a small business network 20 years ago. The equipment is kind of outdated. Some of them are nice and brand new. It just basically depends on how old the boat is. But it's not like you replace a boat that frequently. They're quite expensive. It's kind of like an IT network on land, except the difference is that the network connectivity is shockingly bad. So normally it talks to the internet via either SATCOM, so satellite communications, or via 3G, 4G. SATCOM is latent, it's got heavy latency, it's got poor throughput, it's not very reliable. Try downloading a 20 meg PDF file over a SATCOM link and you will cry, and you will be there for so long, and it will be so irritating when it gets to 17 megabytes and then fails. It's almost like it's happened to me. Also it costs a lot. They charge per megabyte. If you remember the early days of trying to use, anybody remember WAP on phones when WAP first came out? It's like using WAP, except it costs £5 per megabyte, and you have to pay for that. So imagine trying to pull down the latest Windows 10 updates over that, which are now 7 gigabytes or something. It costs a fortune. It's slow. It's annoying. So that's why they never patch stuff. One of the reasons they never patch stuff. It's slow and it costs a lot. And even with WSUS, just pulling one copy of the patches down rather than everything pulling the patches down. Slight problem is that it's not always an Active Directory network, which means that not everything is connected to a domain. So even if you have WSUS, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually deploy those patches to every system. You then get into these things like gateway devices. So gateway devices are things like so when the crew connect. So there's usually Wi-Fi APs everywhere on the ship, and the reason for that is that if you've got a crew that's going to be on a ship for 6 weeks solid, and they're possibly on a 6-month contract, meaning that they don't leave the ship effectively for other than shore leave for 6 months, and at times that will be 6 weeks of crossing the sea, or 3 weeks of crossing the sea, or whatever. So they want internet access because otherwise they're going to get very, very, very bored. And it also means they wouldn't be able to talk to their family, which would suck. So they have individual accounts that they can use to pay for internet access. And there's usually some sort of gateway device that's on the network that allows them to go through and sort of top up their payments and everything and log in and get access. It's basically a captive portal. It's a bit like using the Wi-Fi stuff, except possibly, so the Wi-Fi stuff. It's a bit like using Wi-Fi at a pub or an airport, except they price gouge you less. There is also, as I mentioned, the other thing for gateway devices as well is that can also be for remote access and remote management. That's quite common. The equipment and the operating systems tend to be fairly out of date. It's not always super out of date, but still Windows 7 is quite common. Windows 8.1 is quite common. The most recent vessel that I was on was updated to Windows 10. The reason for that was that we went and looked at it in dry dock, and every 5 years they put it in dry dock. And in that process, they rip out all of the old IT and put in new IT. And in that process, they had literally just updated to Windows 10. But what that means is, for the 5 years previous to that, they were running Windows 7, which means eternal blue everywhere, which is great. Account sharing is also quite common. As I said, like, not everything is domain connected, which means that not everybody has, so like user enrolling and like onboarding and offboarding for members of staff is like, it basically is not a thing. People share accounts, so there'll be like a captain account and a first engineer account, and the chances of them changing the passwords is fairly low, and they're generally shared per role. They're not per person. That's a thing that people are trying to change. It's becoming more of a hey, don't do this thing that's getting pushed out now, but it's still really, 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 really common. Let's talk about OT. So it's quite similar to an ICS or SCADA network, so industrial control stuff. It's usually the OT networks are usually split into two parts. They're not these two parts might be able to talk to each other. It depends, and a lot of this depends on how old or new the ship is, what the ship is doing, because if it's a cruise ship, it's going to be totally different than if it's like an LPG carrier. The cruise ships will likely have advertising networks. They'll have payment stuffs, because obviously, like, if you can't gamble and drink on a ship, what else is there to do? Why else would you go and put yourself in a ship with lots of other people that you've got to be around for all this time? The OT stuff is usually split as one isolated or isolated-ish network on the bridge, and one isolated or isolated-ish network in the engine room. And the navigation stuff sits on the bridge network usually. It's usually just like a Windows or Linux box running some sort of GUI on a PC. It's like a marine-hardened PC, which basically just means it's a PC in like an IP67 enclosure. Updates for ECDIS. So ECDIS is like the navigation thing. So you basically, it's all the charting. It tells you, it has all of the up-to-date things about how deep the water is in various locations, and where all the major shipping lanes are, and where you can and can't go, and where are like safe areas to be and not safe areas to be. And usually the updates for that are over a USB drive, which sounds not great. And it's sort of not great, but given the alternative, which is put it on the network, it's sort of the best that you can do. The one weird thing is that the ECDIS downloads actually are just emailed to them. So they just get an email with like a file, and then they take that file and they put it on a USB stick, and they take the USB stick and they plug it into the ECDIS. I'm sure nothing could go wrong there. So there is a sort of attack surface that's involved there. But again, it's probably better than putting it on a USB drive, particularly because if you've got to, you can update the chart data, but actually updating the ECDIS system itself, well, that's usually a third party that comes and does that. And because they're an appliance vendor, what that usually means is they've got a gold build that they made in 2004, and they've never updated the version of Linux that's running on there, which means that Prevesks are plenty, all of the services are switched on, and you've got to rely on them to actually fix it. It's a lot like, like the Android ecosystem where you buy a phone from a carrier, and it's a Samsung Android phone, so Google patch Android, and then Samsung have to port their weird little patched version of it, and then your carrier has to patch their weird little version of it that has all of the horrible apps that you can't remove, and then they send it to your phone, which means that it never actually happens, because by the time an update comes out, they're like, I don't care anymore. So yeah, it's a similar situation. Then you've got the VDR. The VDR is the black box. So the way the black box works is, it is a system that sits on a ship with a hardened capsule, and it pulls in a bunch of data about where the ship is and what it's doing, and a bunch of other things. I will explain it in more detail later because they're quite fun. But yeah, the idea is it is the black box of the ship. And then there are a number of sensors. So the sensors are things like GPS or compass, or a thing that tells you how high in the water you are. Various other things, and those sensors usually speak I hesitate to call it proprietary. It's more like an almost industry-specific standard. It's called NMEA 0183, which is like the best name ever because everybody can just remember that. And often what happens is those devices talk the serial protocol, but because that serial protocol is quite, old and annoying to deal with in a modern network, usually sometimes what happens is they use what's called an NMEA to IP bridge, which is they take the serial data and then it gets encapsulated in a packet and then sent over a network. That can be fun. So speaking of NMEA 0183, it looks like this. It looks really complicated, but I'll explain how it all fits together. It's a serial data format specification, and it's also a physical specification. The physical specification is, we do this over RS-485, which is if you remember the old serial port connections on computers, that's RS-232. RS-485 is a slightly more long-distance hardy version of that. It's a bit like CAN bus, really. There is actually a CAN bus version of this. It's called NMEA 2000 because it was made in that era where anything new had to have 2000 on the end of it. I basically have never seen. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. I've seen like 2 devices that use NMEA 2000. It's quite uncommon. Data is formatted as this thing called sentences. And the first part, so each of these is an NMEA sentence, and the first part, for example, this GPG-GA or GPG-SV, is what's called the sentence identifier, or actually it might have a different name, whatever. It's an identifier. It's a 5-character identifier, and what that does is it says, this is the type of message that I'm sending to you. Everything after that is dependent on what that is. So the format of the data that comes after that initial sentence part, apart from this little bit at the end, is specific to the individual message type. Now this top one, this GPGGA, that's a GPS fix. So the first thing you get here is a timestamp. I don't know what that is when you decode it, but yeah, that's a timestamp. The next thing you get here, you can see this 5321.6802 north. So that's your is it lat or long? Lat or long? Latitude. So that's your latitude, so it's 5321.6802 north, and then you've got 630.3372 west, and then the number after that says that this is a GPS fix, not a DGPS fix. A 0 means there was an error. A 1 means this is a GPS fix, and a 2 means this is a DGPS fix. DGPS is like a weird radio thing that basically is designed to, it's differential GPS. It's designed to get you a slightly better fix once you've got a GPS fix. I don't fully understand it. 8 is the number of satellites that it's currently talking to. 1.03 is some sort of precision value. It's something to do with like how precise the horizontal positioning is. It's GPS weirdness. I don't really want it. No, I thought my laser pointer just died. Yes, so 61.7 means it's 61.7 meters above average sea level, not actual sea level, because otherwise your boat would be flying. Fun story, I did once spoof this so that a boat was on top of the Eiffel Tower. And this is the 55, M means mean sea level. And 55.2 here is also a height, but it's the height above, I've got the name of it here. It's the height above the WGS 84 reference ellipsoid. I have no idea what that is. It's some sort of thing about the Earth's shape. I don't know what it is or why you need it. And this last thing is a checksum.
Geode. It's a geodetic geode.
Ooh, it's a geode.
Every nation has one. It's their idea what the shape of the Earth is.
Cool. Weird. Okay, but yes, so this bit at the end is a checksum. It is not cryptographic, it is two numbers, and it's something to do with summing up all of this stuff. I've tried to implement this before, and I've never successfully implemented this checksum properly, because every time I've tried to reference it back to the original thing, it just doesn't match up. So instead I just used a library, and even though I looked at my code and then went, yeah, it's doing that, yeah, it's doing that, yeah, it's doing that, I couldn't make it match up. Maybe I'm just a terrible developer. Actually, that's not even a maybe, I'm definitely a terrible developer. Often this gets, each of these gets on those NMEA to IP translators. Often what happens is they encapsulate these as UDP multicast packets or sometimes broadcast packets. And the idea is that on these OT networks, like the bridge OT networks, you'll have a bunch of these different sensors. So you'll have GPS, you'll have compass, you'll have Navtex. Actually, the weird fax machine thing that I was telling you about, that actually also has a format like this. And the idea is that all of that stuff can then be turned into UDP multicast or UDP broadcast, and all of the stuff that's then on that network can consume that data. So often what happens is you'll have multiple ECDIS systems because you'll want a backup, and the idea is that way you don't need to configure them individually. You just put them on the network and then you go, right, I can see all of this data that's being pulled off. There is no authenticity record, and this is authoritative. So if you lie about what kind of sensor you are, like let's say you've got a Navtex device, which obviously involves some sort of complex text processing because you're pulling in some weird like fax data over wireless. Let's say I compromise the firmware on that using some sort of parsing bug, which isn't particularly out of the realm of possibility. I can then go, hi, I'm your GPS receiver, and hi, I'm your GPS receiver, and start sending out anything I like, which is how I did a proof of concept involving the boat being on top of the Eiffel Tower. So it also turns out that the ECDIS machines don't like that too much. If you put them on land, they get very confused and sometimes require a reboot. I think they've got some sort of like A-star pathfinding thing to find like the next location that your boat is likely to be on. But if that's not in the water, it gets very confused. It's like, why is the CPU like on fire? What's going on? So yes, so compromising sensors is certainly a potential way of doing strange things. But the other thing is, of course, you don't even need to do that, because if you can get onto the OT network, well, then you can just pretend to be a sensor without actually having to compromise a sensor. And because there's no way, because they don't check source IPs, which even if they did, you could just spoof the traffic anyway because it's UDP, nobody cares. You can pretty much pretend to be any of the sensors on the network. So I mentioned the VDR earlier, black box. This takes in a bunch of that. So all of those sensors, all of those things like compass and height above the water and blah, 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 all goes into this thing called the VDR. Another thing that goes into the VDR is microphones. So there are microphones on the bridge, and there are microphones on the external wings next to the bridge. And the idea is that captures conversation between whoever's on the bridge. In the event of an emergency, they then have that conversation. It's much like what you would find on a plane, really. So that's always interesting when you're doing a job on a boat, because you're always there like, hey, this is all being recorded. It's kind of weird. Usually it's a Windows or Linux appliance running some bit of software. Again, it's a vendor appliance. They just give you a box and you put a bunch of stuff in. What usually happens is, what always happens is, that data from the sort of VDR controller then gets saved down into what they call a protective capsule or a secure capsule, and that's usually like buried somewhere in the boat. And the idea is that it doesn't matter what happens to this like stupid Windows box that's like in a cabinet somewhere. That's the thing that has all of the data saved on it. So if the boat sinks to the bottom, you can still pull it out. The other thing is that they usually have in the emergency protocol is usually also includes get a USB stick, run up to a panel on the wall, plug it in, press a button, and when it does, it tries to pull out a copy of it. Because the idea is then that you have a copy of all of the VDR data, and it saves you the very, very, very expensive procedure of sending divers down to the bottom of the sea to basically cut the black box out of a bulkhead that's sunk to the bottom of the ground. So yeah, that's another way of doing it. Thankfully, the USB stuff is usually some sort of like weird microcontroller thing behind the panel, and the data that's being sent over gets like translated over. So there's not like an attack path where it's like you're plugging it into a Windows box and auto run is enabled or something like that. I mean, there may be VDRs out there that do that, but I haven't seen one yet. I would not be surprised. If it's connected to the network, which sometimes it is, if it's connected to the network, they often have a web panel, which has all sorts of fun. Default credentials are really common, or engineering accounts, sorry. I forgot you've got to call them those now. I had an incident with one. We will talk about that later. Other appliances, it turns out that we don't bridge the IT and the OT network. Usually means that we know of, and also except for that one box. Every time. There was just as a quick aside, Cyber Gibbons was talking about something to do with from Pentest Partners was talking about an engagement they did where they were looking at IT and OT networks on a boat, and one of the engineers had plugged in a network cable between this switch and this switch and basically just bridged the networks. And when asked why he did that, he went, "Oh yeah, I think I put that in to test a thing and then just forgot it was there." And that's how easy it is to bridge. And then there was another one where it was something to do with somebody wanted to do some work from his cabin, so he just ran a Cat5 cable down. Why do you do these things? So weird. But yes, if you can, when these management gateways or these monitoring gateways, the things that take the engine data or the telemetry data and push them into the IT network so that the IT stuff can talk to the internet, or you can view it from this other room. When that happens, if there is any vulnerability like remote code execution or default creds or anything like that on one of these boxes, you then have a path that goes email phishing with an attachment through to the IT network, through the gateway, into the OT network. Now I can control your boat. Unfortunately, these gateways are, again, one of those things that are vendor appliances that never have their actual core kernel version, or sometimes they are Windows and they're running Windows 7 and there's Eternal Blue, or Windows 8.1 or whatever, and there's Eternal Blue on it, or MS 08067, which is quite unlikely these days because they usually don't run XP. That being said, I did see a VDR running XP the other day on a modern boat, a really big modern boat carrying crude oil. Unfortunately, it ends up being quite easy to go through these gateways. And it's probably the most security critical component on any modern chip, is the thing that you put between those two networks. Because email malware is a thing, and it will never stop being a thing. Please make me have said a lie there, but I think it will always be a thing. So, it ends up being the most, the biggest, thing that needs to be a security barrier to going between those networks. The best solution is to just remove it, but nobody wants to do that because people want the remote management and monitoring and telemetry and stuff. So, here are some headlines. Bridge networks, as we talked about, if you can hop over the from the IT to the OT, bad stuff happens. The stuff on the network often doesn't match what's on the network diagram. You can go and pull out network diagrams. In fact, the situation I was talking about where we used Eternal Blue to hop from IT to OT, that box was not on the network diagram. In fact, we had to take a photo of the box and show it to somebody, and he was like, "I don't know what that is." And it turns out it was a third party who had installed it because they'd paid for this monitoring thing, and nobody had questioned how the data gets from one side to the other, and they just gone and installed this thing and plugged it into both sides, and they had no idea it was there. So it's not on the network diagram. The guy who works on the ship doesn't know what it is, doesn't know it exists, and it wasn't until we went and looked at it and went, "Why is that cable going there and that cable going there?" And what, can we ping? Yeah, we can ping that. What's oh no. And it was very weird. But that is really common. In fact, that's an egregious example of something that was really critical, but it's really common to just be like, okay, what's on this network diagram? Okay, you got this, and this, and then you run an ARP scan and you're like, why are there 4 times as many devices on here than as it says on here? And then it's like, and also, why are none of these devices here? In fact, are you sure this is for the right ship? And it's because these network diagrams get made when the ships get made. But then the problem is, like, stuff gets changed and swapped around, and there's no change control. I mean, it's probably a good thing that there's no change control, because otherwise it'd be like, oh yeah, we have to ask all of these people, and it'll be 2 weeks before we can fix this. So it's just, that's not enough. That's too long. But yes, anyway, stuff doesn't match. It's really, really common. And yeah, the third parties installing and managing stuff, you're basically farming out, they have to farm out a lot of this stuff to third parties because they are a solutions provider. So they just give you this thing and they put it in the boat and then they manage it themselves. The problem then means that you have no control over the security of that product unless you get it tested and pay to get it tested, which again is a cost for the ship owners. You rely on them for updates, as I mentioned before. Patching, obviously, so hard over like terrible network connectivity, and also even harder when everything isn't connected to an AD network and you can just go wsys, deploy. You can't do that because you've got a bunch of stuff on other isolated networks. Now, if those networks are completely isolated, generally speaking, you don't have to worry too much. Usually the appliances and stuff are put in, they're never locked away because the safety requirements are that you need to be able to get to a bunch of that equipment. And to be honest, as much as I would like to be, lock it away because you could just easily mess with all of this stuff. To be honest, I will fully accept that when there's a safety requirement that equipment needs to be accessible in short term if there's something going wrong. That's totally fine. Do that. But yeah, it's hard to patch stuff, and you can't always rely on being able to patch the stuff, even if you have network connectivity, because again, third parties and equipment default credentials everywhere. Either literally in the PDF manual of the thing that you can just download if you've got network connectivity to get the PDF. Or my favourite one, on a label on the box. I mean, it's also in the manual somewhere, but they still put it on the box for some reason. And again, guessable, admin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's really common as well. And again, you rely on the third party sometimes for this, because sometimes you can go, oh yeah, we've got a customized password, we changed it, apart from the bit where the default one still works, even when you've changed it, because it's like a hard-coded engineering password that's in there. So even if you go in and go, all right, I'm going to go change the password for the administrative thing, well, actually, if you still try and log in with the old password, it still works. Really annoying. And yeah, as I mentioned before, it's common that account sharing happens. It's all to do with it usually tends to be that you get one account per role, not one account per person. And again, when you don't have AD, it's quite hard to do the whole user onboard and offboard, particularly when you've got like a crew change, and that's like 40 people that you need to get all enrolled on the network in a day and then go. It's a pain in the ass. So there's reasons that it happens. They're trying to do a better job of it. Anyway, that's enough dry technical stuff. Let's talk about what it's actually like to do things on a boat, because I think I've seen quite a lot of talks about marine stuff, and a lot of them tend to focus on all of the technical aspects of it. I haven't seen many that talk about what it's actually like to go and, get on a boat and do strange things and be in a weird country with crew on the boat and interact with them. So speaking of the crew, they're nice. I quite like the crew. They're like hard-working, regular folks. They're not security people. They're not IT technicians. Some of them are IT technicians because that's their job. But they're commonly, it's commonly like multinational crew is like really, really common. I've been on a boat where there was like some Russian guys, some Polish guys, some Indian guys, some Pakistani guys. It's just like the number of languages spoken on a single boat is quite incredible. My first ever one, it was Brazilian and Indian. So as you can imagine, the food was epic. They can use a computer just fine. They're not super technical, but they understand things like, don't click the link in the email and that kind of thing. They're receptive to it, and most of them are, there's a large proportion of them are like engineers, whether that be, mechanical engineering, whether that be electrical engineering. So they know that kind of stuff really well, and some of that translates over to IT stuff, and they understand process safety and stuff like that. Yeah, and they're receptive. You have a chat with them and they're like, oh, yeah, this is really interesting. And yeah, everybody has been really receptive to security stuff. My background was pen testing. I did security consulting and pen testing for like 5 years, and anybody who's done that will tell you that when you can go to some financial tech organization and they just look at you like, you're here to annoy me. You're here to, cause problems on purpose, as the goose would say. Wait, the goose can't talk. The goose would just say honk. But yeah, no, you get that like resistance. But when you go and talk to these marine tech people, they're like, oh, this is really cool. Yeah. And they're on board with change because in the process safety side of things, like standards change all the time and things are constantly evolving. And then they're very, very rarely against like, they don't have that like, we don't want to touch this. It's all okay. It's like they are really receptive to stuff. Safety. Sometimes you have to go through a safety briefing. I can talk about this because this guy was not employed by one of our clients. He was just a guy in a yard, and he was the safety man in the yard, and he was a bit of an arsehole. He kept sending us back to the gate to try and get a different piece of paperwork and wouldn't let us in the room to go and do the safety briefing. So the guy who was at school, I didn't understand half of what this guy was saying because he had quite a thick accent and he was talking very fast and he was shouting a lot and it was a bit weird. So the guy that was sort of escorting us round eventually got very annoyed at him and went and got some other person who was above his head to tell him to piss off and let us in. So then he let us in, and then he couldn't make his computer work, which was supposed to have this safety briefing. And he loads up this PowerPoint presentation because he can't make the sound work on the computer. It's usually like done as a video, and then it has like little points where it tells them to click onto the next slide. Instead, he did the whole thing himself and read it all out, which meant that basically nobody in the room understood the damn thing that was said. The bit that got really weird is this guy had some sort of like issue about scaffolding. Like this guy had a real boner for scaffolding safety because it got to this bit, and out of nowhere, he explodes, shouting about, you've got to check these tags and this, that, and the other. He's like, you guys, I know you climb up on the scaffolding, you don't check, your wife leaves you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, you fall off the scaffolding, you break your back, you'll be a paraplegic, your wife will leave you. I'm just like, what's wrong with this guy? So sometimes you have to deal with some very colourful and strange individuals. The other thing is that, I'm quite a large person, and I don't deal with heat very well. Unfortunately, so far I've been sent to Brazil and Singapore and a lot of other places that are very hot. And they sometimes make you wear a boiler suit. So I'm quite boiling hot already, and then they put me in a boiler suit and then a hard hat, and then they go, right, now you can get on the boat. And the boat is about there, and I am about here. And there's stairs going up. And it's bloody knackering, and I about melted. Thankfully, most boats are air-conditioned internally, so you go up that and you're half dying, and you go inside and you're like, oh, air conditioning, wonderful. But yeah, so that's always fun. So if you're like me and you're completely out of shape and don't like climbing upstairs, it might be a little bit fun. Speaking of stairs, those stairs sucked, but what sucks more is rope stairs. The first boat I ever got on, so I just turned up with like a suitcase, dressed mostly like this, wearing skate shoes. And the access to the boat was basically stairs made out of rope. Coming down. So I'm walking up this damn thing, trying to lug a suitcase behind me, and one of my shoes fell off. Thankfully, it did not fall through the rope because it would have gone all the way down into the sea and I would have lost it forever and I would have spent the rest of the week with one shoe. Some people might be remembering a story from 44Con from a few years ago where I also lost a shoe. This time I wasn't drunk. Food. I mentioned food. The food is surprisingly excellent. Every single boat I've been on and had food on, it's been great. And to be honest, if you work on a boat all the time and you're doing, heavy work and you're tired, you want some good food. And one of the guys I spoke to there said the one thing that will make a crew so miserable in no time at all is bad food. So luckily, it is really nice. There's usually a meat and a vegetable option. It's, real basic, but, it's nourishing and it tastes great. If the spicy food, which there often is, and I love, there's usually a non-spicy option as well because, not everybody likes spice. But, yeah, it's pretty great. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, and the other thing is that, there's like a galley kitchen sort of thing, and there's usually a fridge full of drinks and whatever that you can just go and get access to, which is quite nice if you're boiling hot. Sleeping. I have slept on a boat. It is weird. Thankfully, again, as I said, it's air conditioned, so usually, and if the air conditioning is working, but it was when I was there, it's not too bad. Like the rooms are sort of fairly Spartan, but you get a bed, a desk, and sometimes like a little. It's a bit like a really small hotel room. You get shower, toilet, all the usual stuff. Not bad at all. There are alarms going off most times of the night, which is kind of annoying, and it can be loud. But that being said, the first boat I was on when we slept there, we were on the deck where the engine room is directly below. And you could hear some noise from the engine, but it was low enough that it wasn't a problem. And the other thing that everybody always says is, "Oh, I'm going to get seasick." If you have seen an oil carrier, unless the waves are that high, you ain't worrying about seasickness. They rock about this quickly at most. You can barely. There have been times when I've been walking around all day and then realised that I haven't felt the horizon move at all day. It's very, very strange. If you're worried about seasickness, I wouldn't worry about it. Don't Nmap SCADA gear. This guy's fun. So SCADA equipment has really crappy network stacks. If you, I'm aware of this, so I thought, right, what I'll do is I'll do an Nmap, but I'll do a T2 speed, so nice and slow, and I'll do a connect scan, because that way I can't do a thing where I overflow the buffer from the number of half-open connections that it's got to sit and wait for. And it'll probably be fine if I turn off all of the service detection. And it turned out that no, it was not fine. In the middle of continuous cargo operations, I knocked off engine monitoring for one of the auxiliary engines. It's not the best idea. They were cool about it. In fact, they took it as a challenge to try and work out what the hell was wrong because it had never happened before. And those scenes in movies where they've got this diagram out and everybody's looking over the diagram and having a conversation. That actually happened. It was quite cool. But this man is terrifying. That thing in his hand is a screwdriver. That thing there is the thing that broke. And some of these pins on here do one of them has a reset operation, and the idea is you just bridge it onto the next thing and it does a reset. So he's poking this. This is a transformer that brings the 1100 volt feed down to a 450 volt feed. If you know anything about what 450 volts does to the human body, I was about the other end of the room. This guy is just I'll just poke around at this. Engineers terrify me. This is fun. Now for a minute, you're just going to look at this and go, what the hell are you taking a picture of? I was walking up the stairs, and the captain walked up to me and he says, "Are you playing with the VDR?" And that's a bad question for somebody to ask you. I said, I was having a bit of a look around. I wanted to go and do a data dump off it because I wanted to see if there was any interest in the data. But it was taking quite a long time, so I just sort of left it there and let it go. And he goes, "Oh, because it caught fire." And I look at him "It did what?" He goes, "Yeah, it caught fire." He goes, "Do you reckon it was anything you did?" I was on a web portal. How do you connect these things? Turns out it was my fault. the next thing he says, he goes, "Oh, this has happened to our last one as well." I was looking at him like, "What are you talking about?" And unfortunately, I didn't get a photo of the immolator. I thought I had one, so this is the closest photo I could get. This thing here is the old one that caught fire that they left in their storage room, and I'd actually walked in and had a bit of a look at it before and didn't realise what it was. It turns out there's actually this is the actual box that has that runs the web panel and everything in there, not the secure storage thing. And it turns out that the power supplies in this are either woefully unrelated, or they're the ones where it says it can do 12 amps and it can do 1.2 amps, and they just lied about what's inside it. And what happened was, the last time when they were doing this, they were doing some sort of like system upgrade or something, and it blew up. And what I was doing a data download, which of course hits the CPU quite hard as it has to compress all of this data, which meant that the current pull from the system went up and the power supply couldn't take it and just caught fire. So that's why it blew up. So that was fun. Summing up quickly, working on boat stuff is really fun. I mean, you don't always, set things on fire, but hopefully don't set things on fire on an LPG carrier. That's a bad idea. But it is fun. And there's lots of room for improvement in the industry because it's like industrial control stuff. It's quite far behind. Patching is hard. And they're only just coming up to sort of speed on we actually need to focus on this stuff now. The good thing is that they're fairly receptive to it. There is a lot of work being done on it. There's some new security standards that have come out for cyber security on marine stuff. Thankfully, they don't all step on each other's toes. We have this standard and this standard and this standard, but this standard and this standard tell you two conflicting things. What do we do? But no, thankfully, it's mostly okay. If you ever want to go do some stuff on a boat, now you know what it's like, and hopefully hasn't put you off. In fact, hopefully it's made you want to go and look at marine stuff, because it is really fun. Anybody got any questions? Hello.
How long are usually the engagements when you're doing this?
So the question was, how long are usually the engagements? It varies, usually about a week. We've done a few that were a little over a week, a couple that were a little under a week, but they were much more focused on one specific area, because something else had already been tested, and it was just us coming in and doing some of the OT gear that they'd swapped over. But generally speaking, about a week, and it's usually a week of maybe 3-4 people going on a vessel. It largely depends on the customer requirements, just like anything else. We try not to do 2-day assessments, because getting flown halfway across the world and doing a 2-day assessment and then flying back is a pain in the ass. I have done it once; it wasn't much fun. We try and put a reasonable amount of time behind it. There may well be situations where you want to put, 5 people on it for 2 weeks because you've got some huge thing, maybe an oil rig or something like that with a huge amount of systems, maybe one of the big luxury cruise boats, because you've got so many payment systems and a bunch of other things and advertising and various other things that are around that you have to test. But generally speaking, it's about a week. Anybody else?
How many do you do in a year?
So that's a tricky question, because so my role isn't actually technically customer facing. So I mostly do the idea behind my role is to work out how we can get the pen test folks up to speed, and so that they can do it instead of me. That means that I have done some stuff on boats. In terms of how many in a year for everybody, I wouldn't have a clue, because I don't get vision over it. Me personally, I think I've done 4 on actual. Wait, how many on actual boats? I can't remember now. One of the other things is that you don't always actually go on a boat. Some of it is this piece of infrastructure that's going to go on a boat. Here it is in a lab environment. Go and test it. So it sort of depends on which way you want to look at it. But as Lloyd's Register as a whole, probably an absolute ton, because there's a whole bunch of governance, risk and compliance work that gets done that involves interviews with the crew, as well as some of the technical checks. Then there's a bunch of whether you want to include the actual pen test stuff, whether you want to include research time that you've spent on doing something. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, unfortunately. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
This might be a bit of a daft question. so obviously you get on the boat, you dock, but do they dock just to let you off, or is it like planned?
So the question is, do they just dock and then let you on and then bugger off, or then do they sit around? The answer is it depends. Now, usually you don't find boats that are docked for a long amount of time because docking fees are really expensive and they've got stuff to go and do. Every time that you've got your massive fuel carrier just sort of sat there doing nothing, you're losing money. The other thing is that the direction that they're going to go changes on a day-to-day basis, because what can happen is they'll pull up, fill up with fuel, and then go, right, who's going to pay the most at this very second? And then go to them. So it can be really tricky to find out where a boat's going to be in 2 weeks, let alone in 2 months. So usually you have to go for weird situations. So one of the weird situations was a boat that was docked as effectively shoreside fuel storage because they didn't have enough locally. Another one was that a boat was in dry dock for 2 weeks so that they could basically overhaul the boat. So it generally ends up being like those kinds of unusual situations. We have had one where they picked somebody up at one location that they knew they were definitely going to be at, and then went up the coast, and they did the test while they were going up the coast, and then they got off at the other side. So it generally depends on what's available. Yep.
Have you done any, or you planning to do any super yachts and stuff like that, like tankers?
I would love to. So the question was, have I done any super yachts? I have not done any super yachts. It's certainly something that we're definitely interested in. I think there's been some conversations with a particular provider about potentially having a look at some of that. The thing is that a lot of that is few and far between. Like, it's only every so often that you find somebody who's got, a billionaire super yacht available for you to go and take a poke at, and is specifically calling you. It's not very common situation. Whereas, fuel tankers and cargo ships and things like that are way more common, way more likely. And the other thing is, in terms of actual aggregate amount of money that's being transferred, in terms of the amount of assets that they're actually looking after, the super yachts have comparatively nothing on them. It's just the high value of the passengers usually that they're worried about.
I think we're going to have to finish there, but thanks very much.
Thank you.